So pleased to have my good friend Greg here with me today to talk about what is essential about um, focusing oriented therapy, about what the philosophy of the implicit brings to our therapy work and how our work is shaped by it, and the other traditions that we're drawn to and cross with focusing, and why that's needed and what that crossing looks like, something like that. But we're going to be quite spontaneous. So
Yeah.
I should also say that it's Greg's passion to have more contemporary dialogues about uh, focusing oriented therapies as they are practiced and conceptualized now in
Mhm.
2022. And so this is one of the first ones that we're going to do on our new YouTube channel.
Do you want to say a little bit about yourself in case there's a person that doesn't know you?
Sure. I'm Lynn Preston. I'm very involved, have been very involved for many years in practicing and teaching the integration of focusing oriented therapy and contemporary relational psychoanalysis. And in the last years, I've become very interested in how we bring um, our focusing understandings into community work and conversation. And but we're not going to talk about that today, but that's just by way of an introduction.
Great. And I'm delighted to be here talking to my friend Lynn. I learn a lot from disagreeing with Lynn. My name's Greg Madison. I live in the UK, originally from Canada, and I've been, like Lynn, practicing focusing and focusing-oriented therapy for a long time. My integration is focusing and existential phenomenological psychotherapy. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about what each adds to the other and maybe what we take from each other's approaches as well.
Do you think we should start with what drew us to Gendlin's work?
Yeah, I think that would be, good idea.
Yeah, you want to start with that?
Okay. For me, I was a young university student. I think it was my first or second year at university back in the early 80s. And I was introduced to Gendlin's work through a professor that was involved in the Dream book and kind of dialogues about Gendlin's book on dreams. And I used it in a few different research studies. But I also began to use it in my own life. And it was a relief and very inspirational to me to find someone who gave me permission to pay attention to my own experience. And he was an important enough person that I thought I had some external authority that to tell me that my inner knowing could be my authority. I needed some external authority to give me permission to use myself as my authority. So that's really what drew me to it, and everything else I've learned into that kind of foundation of focusing and an experiential approach. How about you?
Well, my experience is similar in a way. As a young therapist, I was trying to put together a lot of different approaches that I was studying, and by chance came upon a flyer for someone I had never heard of, Eugene Gendlin, doing a workshop on experiential therapy. And even though I had just moved into my new apartment in the village, I was compelled to go to it. And it was this simple, large room. And Jean was doing a listening round as I walked in. And I was just amazed at how, when he listened to someone, the whole atmosphere of the room changed. And there became all of this depth and intricacy to a simple thing that someone was saying. And he wasn't adding to the content of what they were saying, but in his way of looking at them and receiving the person, it was as if he was listening them into a deeper, larger self. And then he was inviting the rest of the group to do that, to listen to the next person. And then he would help the person to listen to the nuance, to what we call the felt sense of what the person was saying. And I was mesmerized by it. It seemed to me that it was the crux of something about aliveness, about intimacy, about depth. And it was so, on the one hand, so simple, and on the other hand, so complex. So I immediately asked him to supervise me and do a training that I put together. And I've been absolutely fascinated with the breadth of Jean's philosophy and with what I learned clinically and continue to learn. And even though I can teach the same thing over and over again, it's always different and always brings something new because it seems very vast.
That's lovely that you got your first introduction directly from Jean as a person.
Yes, I feel very lucky.
And watching him listen someone into a deeper sense of themselves. Yeah. So I'm curious if you want to say more, what you witnessed in that first meeting, how did it sort of, I don't know how to ask it exactly, but how did it alert you to something that was missing, or how did it fill in something fresh that you didn't have in your other trainings?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. It did immediately. And it just felt so right to me that in many of the trainings, there are lots of techniques to try to help people to get to what's really going on for them. And the techniques felt at that time separate from you and the person. It was something that tools that you were using. And although there are many skills involved in that kind of deep listening, it didn't feel like it was separate. It felt like Jean was being himself with another human being and deeply seeing that human being, and that it felt like, oh, that's what I want. I think I was looking for that sense of the power of really encountering another person and being with them. And somehow Jean is able to show that sense of deep respect for the the mystery of the other
Yeah.
and wanting to know them just in looking at the person, like, oh, there's a mystery here, there's a vastness here. I want to
Mhm.
unlock it, I want to see it, I want to know it. And I wanted to be able to do that.
Yeah, there's something about that way of being that is more like a being quality than some kind of technique. It's something about a whole person listening to another person so that they can become more whole in
Right.
some way.
Right.
Hmm.
And for you, what hooked you was the sense of um, also of the sense of yourself as a person with your own authority and your own ability to think and to create. And here was uh, this uh, liberation in a way to really be yourself in your thinking world.
Yeah, for me, it was, I learned focusing before I had my psychotherapy trainings. And I, it didn't even occur to me the idea that I could maybe go and learn from Jean directly at that point. I was too young and I was on the other side of Canada. So I did a lot of focusing on my own. When my first at least couple of years or more of focusing was just me in the book, me laying on my living room floor, guiding myself. Um, and that was very effective for me. Um, so I want to stand up for focusing alone and say that it can be really, really useful and difficult at times, but also very useful. When I finally was kind of introduced to the focusing world, it was much later. I didn't know there was such a thing as a focusing world. It seemed so much a practice of introspection or something like that, that
Yeah.
focusing and listening with another person came much later for me, which is odd. I don't think that's maybe so usual.
Mm.
And so when it came to, well, I guess I started practicing it with friends, just listening to people in a way that I had learned from the original book and noticing how much more came simply from listening and just quietly attending to someone and waiting for them to say more and inviting them to say more simply by reflecting what they had just said, just using it with friends and sort of finding the intimacy that comes even with a stranger. It doesn't have to be a friend. It's just the intimacy comes so quickly.
Yes.
If you really listen to someone. And then suddenly, even if a moment before they seemed unreasonable, or I had some reactive response to them, after listening, just within like a few minutes, the whole connection arrives. And suddenly there's somebody worth listening to, or I've redeemed myself somehow by listening. But yeah, the therapy stuff came a lot later for me.
What do you mean by you redeemed yourself by listening? It's interesting.
Because it could be that, I mean, Jean often spoke about not having anything in the way, and the way you described what you saw in that room when you walked in, I think you witnessed having nothing in the way, not some kind of technique or anything else. But for me, at least, so much can get in the way. And from my side, it could be some reactive emotional response to the person, some kind of critical attack or feeling ashamed of myself or something. But if I can put that aside enough to actually listen to the person, the listening connection allows me to forgive myself as well as connect more deeply to them. Suddenly, I'm a person I'm proving my worth by being able to listen, maybe, and it redeems me.
I love that. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
It has a lot of the philosophy in it, like the sense that yourself is the nothing in the way, that
Mm-hmm.
that yourself is this intimacy, and you're
Mm-hmm.
redeeming yourself, you're refinding yourself, making yourself whole um, by going to that place. And I
Yeah.
sort of like the way the focusing world and Jane use the word place, going to that place,
Mm-hmm.
because it does feel like a different world, a different dimension of being when you when you when you go down that hole, like like who was it that went down the rabbit hole? Uh, Alice.
Alice.
And
Yeah.
yes, but it's a different kind of hole. It's like you go into an opening of an opening where everything is interesting and new
Mm-hmm.
and vast,
Mm-hmm.
and you can feel when that happens, when you're focusing yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
I can only focus myself when I'm doing it with my journal. I can't do it without a journal.
Mm-hmm.
but I can do it. Um, but that moment when you enter that place where you're interested, and then things start to kind of unfold and speak to you.
Yeah.
That's sort of when I like to think of it as magical, but I don't like to use that word because people have funny associations to it. It's so basically human, but there's
Mm-hmm.
something so wondrous about the self state, we would say in psychoanalysis, of being open to the vastness, to what
Yeah.
he calls the implicit intricacy, all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and then your defensiveness and all of that sort of falls aside for a bit, and then it comes back, of course, and then
Yeah, it falls aside, or it's just given such a larger context that it's somehow welcome rather than, something
yes,
to correct or something.
that's right. Yeah, it's
But
one
when I'm,
ingredient.
yeah, when I'm listening to you, it reminds me when Jean talks about not putting anything in between you and the client or you and the other person, it can sound like if you don't put anything in between, there's nothing there. It's like it's a big empty space. But what you're describing, and it certainly is my experience, is if you don't put anything in between, it's like there's no obstacle there. And instead it is this much richer, more than conceptual kind of experience. It's like it's experientially full, that putting nothing in between. And I think that, when you talk about the self state, I'm thinking self state, yes, but maybe even more than that, unless you want to define self as something that goes right to the edge of the universe. It's like you enter, I do, this is how I would describe it for myself anyway. I enter a state where me and not me is very difficult to discern. It's like it's a state that expands so that I can't find the edge of it.
Yes. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Me and not me expands so that you can't find the edge of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You can feel the meanness, that larger body, the
Yeah.
that goes way out
Yeah.
to the other, but to the world, to it
Mhm.
embraces the whole big area.
Yeah, the whole shebang.
Yes, the whole shebang. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something more I want to say just as I hear you say that back. That listening state, which is so expansive, so that strangely I become the environment within which I can listen deeply.
Mm,
It's like the I that is the environment becomes kind of the context of the whole event.
right. Right. So that 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 opening there to a different dimension is the opening in yourself to that larger self that is interaction with everything.
Yeah.
Later I really appreciated Jean's philosophical um, rootedness in a kind of new concept, what he calls a new concept of being interaction, and that
Mhm.
self, that is the interaction, um, and doesn't stop with your skin or with your
Mhm.
issues or with your reactiveness or with,
Mhm.
your personality or something.
Yeah, exactly.